Hello, guys. Welcome to that time of the week that we like to call the 5x5. We being Ali Maxwell, George Ellick, 5 Yards ambassadors. We love playing the game. We love being involved with the team. And we love getting together each week to focus on 5 players who are on 5 Yards, who we think are interesting for footballing and for 5 Yards reasons. We got our first ever special guest on today's episode. You've got to wait a couple of minutes to find out who that is. George, I know what you're thinking. That lockdown hair issue has got to the point where now I just have to wear a cap for all of these recordings because it's so bad and there's no end in sight for me in terms of a haircut. Absolute disaster.
I've seen you with the cap off as well, and I'm glad you're wearing it. I've got mine's quite a nice little length at the moment.
Oh, yes. A lovely little length. Tell me, it's been a week since we last chatted. On 5 Yards, plenty going on, of course. New players have gone up. We've had a transfer window or two. What's been the most interesting thing for you in the last week or so?
Interesting. I think probably the story to come out of it is that we've had a request, maybe unsurprisingly, for Crawley Town, utility left-sided player Mark Wright from The Only Way is Essex. And I have it on I'm assured by the scouts that he is going to be going up quite soon up on the game. So I'm intrigued to know what his value is going to be, given that you only get performance pay for what you do on the pitch, not off it. So I can't imagine it'll be particularly high. I wonder if anyone's going to buy him. In more serious matters, Ali, because this is a serious show, of course. Yes. Emile Smith-Rowe is the darling at the moment of Arsenal. And he's been requested many times over the past couple of weeks. He's finally gone up on the game, and a lot of action immediately on Smith-Rowe, a player that we were impressed with, I think, in a short loan spell last season at Huddersfield in the EFL. And Moussa Dembele, who is moving to Atletico Madrid, another popular player who's getting a lot of action this week. So they're the two kind of big name young players coming through who've been getting a bit of buying. But Mark Wright, probably my in a week where he's made a few headlines, surely going up on 5 Yards is going to be the biggest of the lot.
Well, I mean, Dembele's the interesting one for me, I guess. Is the first, or one of the first major bits of transfer news. We're getting towards the middle of January, and we'd expect the second half of Jan to be fairly busy in that regard. Of course, that's a huge part of 5 Yards. We've talked about it over the last few weeks. I dare say it will be mentioned once or twice as well on today's episode, that trying to get ahead of transfers, trying to predict transfer moves is of course going to be such a good way to make money on 5 Yards. And I dare say there'll be people who had Moussa Dembele as he was a Lyon player, maybe getting in front of this one, and now he's going to Atletico Madrid in the latter stages of the Champions League, in a higher PP league in La Liga, probably feeling quite pleased with themselves, especially given that Diego Costa's squad slot was lost the other day as he was released. Next up, our first ever special guest welcoming on the 5 Yards 5 and about to replace George's face is Sam Tighe. So Sam Tighe from the Ranks FC podcast joins us to talk about Donyell Marlon, and he's pretty well placed to do so because Sam, more so than George and I, watches a ton of football from all across Europe. And you're also someone that takes 5 Yards pretty seriously, Sam. You've built a decent squad already, I know. And Marlon is such an interesting one in 5 Yards terms because I think since launch, he's risen from 16 million on the site up to 24 million. So he's obviously going to be picking up a lot of interest. I was wondering if I could ask you a couple of questions about him starting in classic 5 Yards fashion. Just give me a scout report on this guy. Tell me about him and what you like about him. What made you add him to your squad?
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly gone up in value a fair bit. And the way that I operate on 5 Yards is I basically sort the players on value, go all the way to the bottom and start trying to pick out who I think whoever is in charge at 5 Yards, no disrespect, has probably underestimated players. And that's how I ended up with, investing in someone like Michael Olise. That's how I ended up investing in Dominic Solanke. And that's how I ended up with Donyell Marlon. I think the trigger was the fact that I support Granada, and PSV played Granada in the Europa League, and Donyell Marlon scored against us in a 1-0 win, which basically confirmed group winners' spot in the Europa League. I was furious about it because it ruined my team's chances of finishing top of the group. And I knew it was going to happen because I knew he was amazing. So that was the prompt for me to go, all right, time to put my money where my mouth is here. And at only 16 million, he seems really undervalued because his goal scoring record over the years for PSV since joining them has been really, really strong, like really strong. And like this season, he's on 7 goals and 4 assists in 11 starts. So a goal or assist every single game. He's backed that up over the years. Basically a goal every 100 minutes or so. So the production is there. So from a basic 5-yard standpoint, that PP, that performance pay is in play eventually. And I guess the other part of the equation is I think he's going to move to a big club at some point. And that's where the PP starts to kick in outside of obviously the Europa League knockouts, because he's really good. Like he's this very, very clear style of modern forward. And by that, I mean, if you think of your sort of Mohamed Salah's, Sadio Mane's, Timo Werner's, Cristiano Ronaldo's, they're kind of like hybrid number 9/wide forwards. So they can come in off one of the flanks and become that number 9 presence, or receive the ball high up, can run in behind, but can also drop in, receive the ball between the lines, maybe take it and dribble a little bit and offer that goal scoring presence. So these players, they can kind of do a bit of everything. And it's a very kind of modern trend on a forward, I think. It's the player that Pep wants. It's the player that Klopp wants. You know, all of these managers are looking for this kind of player. I think Marlon completely fits that bill. So I guess what I thought when I looked at him as from a stylistic point of view is, where can't he fit? Genuinely, like he's so made for the modern game, and so made for how top teams operate and use their wide forwards and, you know, number 9s and foils. I just figured his horizons were so broad, and he's such a good player that over the course of 2021, I think he's going to move for like 30 or 40 million pounds to a top team.
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, there are a ton of links being made. Not so much necessarily for the January transfer window. It feels like PSV will keep him and see how they do in those knockout stages of the Europa League. Of course, the Eredivisie is not a performance pay league on 5 yards. So it really is, in the short term, about the Europa League in terms of PP. But you've proven yourself to have made a very, very savvy call just based on his future value in the eyes of the scouts, because his price has risen by, is that 50%? Yeah, from 16 million to 24 million. So you're already in pretty good nick as a Marlon owner. I mean, is this completely off the mark to suggest that when you were talking about him, I was thinking about another Dutch forward player that we've spoken about on this show before in Memphis Depay? Are there any similarities there? I mean, they're both in the Dutch national squad. Depay's obviously 5 years older than him. Is Marlon a similar type of player?
I think there are definitely some parallels there for sure. I mean, the very fact that Depay probably calls the left wing his home, or did so maybe up until about a year ago, and is now kind of seen as this central striker, and a striker that can drop in and take the ball and shield the ball, but also run in behind as well. He has that versatility of movement, and you only have to go back to the game against Manchester City where you saw him doing sort of both of those things simultaneously. So Marlon is I think primarily a left winger coming in on the right foot, but absolutely can filter into those number 9 positions. And I think with a little bit of time and development could actually just turn out to be a striker. So in the sense that they both pretty much straddle that same 2 positions, both use the same foot, both have a nice variety with how they move and can receive the ball in different ways. And they're both Dutch. Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, look, Marlon doesn't. He's not as quick. He's not as fast over a long distance. I wouldn't label him a fast player. Okay. I think he glides, and I think he's got nice acceleration and burst, and can dip between the lines and can kind of cause people quite a lot of problems in that area. But I wouldn't necessarily say he's a trailblazer over the top. But I think Depay maybe had that a little bit more. Marlon maybe wants to come in and receive the ball to feet a little bit more, but can go over the top, which is probably a key distinction. In those tight areas, he looks a little bit more like Sancho, but I wouldn't say that that's the comparison, because Sancho is actually also just like, he's just not very fast either, is he? And I think Marlon probably has more to his game in terms of the way he receives the ball.
It's definitely there's definitely a podcast to be done about players who people think are fast, but actually probably don't have a particularly good sprint speed on them. I mean, Sam, your Ranks FC podcast is a huge recommended listening for anyone who plays 5 yards, just because of the breadth of football that you cover, and the fact that you guys as a trio all have, you know, such a good eye for a player, and you're really excited to find those young gems before they move on. So I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't get involved with Marlon when you told me you were getting involved with Marlon. My thinking was, I don't know much about this guy, and he's playing in a league without PP, and now I'm hugely regretting that. Just stay on the line while I tell you about my wild card that I'm going to talk about this week on 5 yards 5, because I'm just interested to know if it's a name that you've come across, if it's anyone you've looked at all. I was basically doing a bit of FB ref scouting ahead of today's show. And I was looking at their metric, which is shot creating actions. The definition being actions that directly lead to a shot, such as passes, dribbles, and drawing fouls. And in the top 5 Euro leagues, I was looking down the list and I was like, oh, this is boring. It's all the names you'd expect: Messi, Grealish, Çalhanoğlu, whose numbers are massively boosted by set pieces. Then Romain Fèvre of Brest in France, and then Bruno Fernandes. So I'm like, okay, who is this guy? He's £20 million on 5 yards, which I would say is not too high. So I'm instantly excited. I search his name on Twitter, and there's Scouted Football. They've taken a look at him. Certainly statistically, there's a lot to like in terms of progressive carries, in terms of completed dribbles. So I'm like, okay, he's creating shots. He's carrying the ball well for the league that he's playing in. And then you dig a little bit deeper, and I just think this is exactly what 5 yards is all about. So I wanted to talk about him today. The first caveat, which you mentioned to me, is he is creating a lot of those chances from set pieces. And that, did you sort of mark someone down because of that?
Not necessarily. I mean, not in 5 yards terms. I mean, that doesn't matter, right? A chance is a chance, and a goal is a goal.
Yeah.
I haven't seen much of Fèvre at all. Like, I would have really. I definitely, if I'm not an authority on Marlon, just because I'm an appreciator, I really don't know much about Fèvre. But I did see, looking at some of the players that have created the most chances in Europe over the first half of the season, it is very clear that a big wedge of his chances created do come from set pieces, come from corners and free kicks, which it doesn't make him a bad player for 5 yards. I just think you need to be careful in other terms. That, like, you don't crown him one of the chief creators of the world. You don't say that he's Grealish or Rodrigo de Paul or Angel Di Maria or something like that, because he's actually way more like Mason Mount. Because Mason Mount, he's created loads of chances because he takes a lovely corner. And big Kurt Zuma's great at heading them in. And so is Thiago Silva. And so is Olivier Giroud. So you just have to be a bit more wary in those terms. But all chances are created equal on 5 yards, and all goals are too.
Well, that's right. And I guess it's like, but you're right to bring that up because, the side of 5 yards, which is working out the next move and working out where he might end up, is quite crucial to know which players teams will be looking at and applying that context and thinking, okay, let's not get carried away here. But just to flag it up to anyone who's watching who doesn't know much about Fèvre, as I said, he's playing for Brest, but he's a Monaco kid through the system there. He's actually 22 years old. So I was kind of surprised because he is lighting up Ligue 1 to all intents and purposes this season, but it's basically the first senior minutes he's ever played. And he only played one Ligue 1 game for Monaco in their first team, which, considering, as I say, he's 22, I feel like Monaco have given a lot of opportunities to a lot of very young players in the last 5 years. I'm a little confused and need to dig a bit deeper on what I'm missing here with this kid. But so he's only ever played 20 Ligue 1 games. You just have to say this before you get too excited. But from what I've seen, watching a little bit of video, there's a real touch of the Ben Arthurs to the way that he receives the ball, how left-footed he is, and the way that he carries it as well. As you said, those dead ball situations he's brilliant with. He's got a wicked left foot. He's the sort of player that you'd want to play for your team, I think. He got capped for France under-21s in November, so that'll be on the radar of certain teams and recruitment departments. And there are reports that Manchester United are interested, but I've got to be honest with you, they're not from the sort of sources that I would generally have faith in. But I just thought he's worth flagging up here because, as we know, so many teams use data to scout, or at least to do some filtering when they're starting a search for a player or a certain position. And anyone that's using any kind of data to search for creative players, Fèvre is going to be popping up on those searches. We've spoken before about how the media rights collapse in Ligue 1 mean that they just don't have any strength to hold on to their players when there's interest, really. At least that's what we assume. So I just thought this is such a wild card, and it's so fun in 5 yards terms to see what happens. He's only got 20 Ligue 1 games under his belt, Romain Fèvre. I've no idea how good he could be, what his ceiling is. I don't even know what I'm missing and why Monaco didn't give him a chance. But he'll be on plenty of radars, and I can't wait to see how it goes. This is the point where I say to you, Sam, and to everyone else, I'm not suggesting that you buy him on 5 yards, but I say go and have a look, check this guy out, make your own mind up about whether you think he's a flash in the pan or if he's got some serious talent. Because at 20 million, if he does end up moving to a club that's playing European football, that could look very cheap indeed pretty quickly. So that's Romain Fèvre of Brest.
Yeah, just hope that whichever club he moves to, they let him take corners.
All right, thanks, Sam. Back to George now. Okay, we got George Ellick back in the room. Brilliant to speak to Sam there about Daniel Marlon. And I'm still as intrigued as ever about Romain Fèvre, who I learned about this week. George, who do you want to talk about first up on this week's 5x5?
Well, I now feel like my first pick is incredibly boring after you two hipsters go all out in the first segment. But I'm talking about Ruben Dias, who, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. I'm about to watch him play against Brighton, so I'm hoping he doesn't do anything in the next couple of hours that's going to date this horrifically. But he is up on 5 yards at £56 million. By my reckoning, he is the second most expensive centre-back on 5 yards behind Matthias de Ligt. He's 23 years old. And I don't think enough is being made of Ruben Dias. I don't think people have necessarily realised yet that after years and years of poor recruitment at centre-back, Manchester City have actually found someone who probably has about 10 years in front of them of being a world-class centre-back. He will play every single game for Manchester City whilst he's fit for the foreseeable, which of course for PP is important. You've got a team who are now the favourites to win the Premier League, who are the favourites to win the Champions League as well, playing for a Portugal side who aren't too bad either. He has everything in front of him in terms of the career, and in terms of his game itself, it's elite. I mean, he's so good that he's even managing to make John Stones look like a good centre-back again, which I don't think anybody necessarily thought this was going to be something we saw going forward. He's very, very capable on the ball, as we expect from Man City centre-back. He is a player who has that calmness and then is also quick on the turn and very good defensively. There's a side to his game that we haven't necessarily seen yet. He scored 9 goals in 91 games for Benfica, who he signed from. And in his last game for Portugal, he scored a brace. He's yet to score a goal for Manchester City yet in the Premier League. It'd be amazing if he does it tonight because I'm going to look incredibly cool. But he's had 7 shots so far in the Premier League, adding up to about 1.2 expected goals. He's basically due a goal. And I think in time, even though we haven't seen it yet, he is going to be a goal-scoring centre-back. He's going to be a player that Manchester City can rely on for 3 or 4 or 5 goals per season from set pieces. De Ligt is up at 59 million. Alisson is up at 54 million. In my personal opinion, Dias is a player in terms of his ability and what he can do. You look at the scout reports and, he's not going to score under basically 8 for anything, probably except for finishing in terms of the attributes in the scout reports. He is young enough, in centre-back terms, 23 is a baby. It's basically being a teenager. So it's not particularly exciting because he is the second most expensive centre back. But I think you're on a bit of a bet to nothing here. You've got a player who, I think a poor centre back playing for Man City should be valued at about this. And what he could do in his career and where he could go with them is massive. And when Aymeric Laporte is back fit as well, those two playing at centre back is going to be pretty exciting. I mean, Manchester City have only conceded 5 goals in the 13 Premier League games that he started. City haven't been a particularly good defensive team recently, and he is changing that. So I'm excited by Dias. It's not necessarily a strong buy, but I think if this is the kind of way that you want to play the game, if you want immediate PP and immediate success, I think there still might be a bit of value left in Dias. And as soon as he starts scoring a couple of goals, which will come, then I'm going to look very smug.
So we're going to finish off with a couple of players within the EFL, very much our bread and butter, of course. And first up, we asked you guys on Twitter, those of you that follow the 5 Yards account, to vote on who we discuss first and foremost. Now, it was Ben Whiteman, heavily linked to a move to Preston to be completed in the next few days from Doncaster, of course, rising a division into PP territory. Siriki Dembele, who's also been linked to moves from Peterborough in League One to the Championship. Marcus Force, who's at Brentford, of course. But the winner was Derby's Louis Sibley, 19-year-old midfield player on 5 yards at £21 million. Pretty penny that already, you have to say, on 5 yards. And Sibley's someone who burst onto the scene in the early part of 2020. In fact, the last EFL game that was played before the break for the global pandemic, which hit the nation and, hit the globe, was Sibley scoring an absolute screamer live on Sky against Blackburn. And then the first game back after the 3 or 4 months that they had off, he's got a hat-trick against Millwall. And so those two things combined meant there was a lot of Sibley hype around that period. The hat-trick itself showed just so many exciting qualities in a young player, because Sibley's not a striker. Now, you might think scoring a hat-trick would normally be a number 9. Actually, Sibley was playing in the hole that day, breaking from midfield into the box, making late runs. And what we saw him on that day, which is basically what you're looking for at the very top level, was an ability to play in tight spaces, a desire and the energy to run in behind constantly, make clever runs, not just runs for run's sake, and a calm finisher as well with both feet. So there would have been a lot of scouts flocking to Derby games towards the end of last season. This year, he hasn't necessarily found a role in a Derby side that, of course, had a horrendous start to the season, are starting to build again under Wayne Rooney. And Sibley's been a part of that, but a bit part, I would say. They're playing 4-3-3, and I would say that there's not an obvious place for Sibley right now. He's been starting a few games out wide as a winger, but him and Jozwiak swap wings a lot. I think Sibley's someone who's not a natural wide man. He wants to be involved in the half spaces and even actually in central areas. So possibly you could see, given that he's left-footed, off the right-hand side, coming in narrow with an overlapping attacking right back, you could certainly see him getting into some dangerous areas and developing his game that way. But I do think this is one concern about Sibley when we're thinking in 5 yards terms, trying to project the next few years and the career, beyond that. I'm not that sure how easy it will be for a player of his profile who potentially might want to play as a sort of second striker or a number 10 to actually find a ton of opportunities, either in the Championship or, of course, up in the Premier League, which is where we really want these EFL players that we buy on 5 yards to end up. So, I mean, for me, it's certainly not a buy right now with Sibley. It might be that as Derby improve even further under Rooney, and under Rooney's tutelage, of course, Sibley could develop his game. He's still so young at 19. And a year or two ago, he was dominating youth level in a brilliant Derby side. So, there's so much time on his side that as a really uber long-term hold or buy, I mean, absolutely, I wouldn't put you off necessarily. But for me right now, I think he's quite a long way off being a starter in a Premier League team. And unfortunately, in 5 yards terms, given that's where the PP's at the moment, I'm not seeing a huge of PP on his immediate horizon, or a huge price rise as well, which would be another reason why you'd want to buy into someone. So it's one for me to leave alone at the moment. But certainly, if you've not seen a lot of Sibley, he's a player to watch for Derby County, that's for sure. Next up in the EFL, George?
Yeah, Harry Pickering. I wrote a scout report on Harry Pickering last week. Disclaimer, I wrote it because you and I were talking about him on Sky Sports on Friday evening. And what better way could there be to prepare about talking about a player than watching loads of videos of him and writing a scout report? And that was what I did. I mean, he's a player that I've known about for a while now. I mean, he was key to Crewe's promotion winning side in League Two last season, but he's 22 years of age. For those who don't know, he's 22 years of age. He is a left back, and he is a very attacking left back. He's a player who, his relationship with Charlie Kirk, who is the left-sided kind of forward player for Crewe, has been really important to the way that Crewe play. Under David Artell, they play a very attacking brand of football, using both fullbacks, Perry and G on the right-hand side and Harry Pickering on the left, a lot in terms of their attacking output. But Pickering is, in many ways, a kind of modern day fullback, as we expect. He looks to get forward whenever possible. He's very good at getting on the overlap to Kirk. Maybe a little bit suspect defensively. He's got pace, not necessarily searing pace, but he's quick enough, especially on the ball. But in other facets of his game, he's very different. He often drifts inside to take up positions on the underlap where Kirk will move on the outside. He often even comes inside in order to make the run inside the right back to pick up the ball on the byline. His delivery is also very good, and he scores free kicks too. In my scout report, I put him as level now 65, potential 80. And I don't think that's necessarily much to do with his ability. I think it's just he's the kind of player who's going to get better very, very quickly in the right team. He needs to play for a side who retain the ball, who look to play fast, aggressive football and around better players. He's been very heavily linked to Blackburn in the last week. The fees being quoted around the £500,000 mark are surprising, not just for us, by everybody. The £6 million that 5 yards have him at is more reflective of his ability and his talent and where he's going to go, I would say. But it does, in the press today, it sounds like Crewe are holding firm for whatever they want, and Blackburn might be coming back in the summer, which would be great news for Crewe fans. He's just a really fun player to watch. Blackburn fans, I'm sure, would be delighted to get hold of him. And in terms of the reason why I say that it's not necessarily him, I think if he were to move to Blackburn in January, I think by February, he'll be closer to 80 than 65. We just have to see that progression at the high level. I put him down as a strong buy in the scout report. I definitely still think he is that. He'll be playing championship football very, very soon, if not in January, certainly in the summer, because if Blackburn are in for him, I can guarantee you that a few others are too.
Well, it was a busy transfer window on Tuesday. We've got another one opening on Friday, just to go through some eye-catching buys. Moussa Dembele, we touched on. Someone went pretty big with a buy of Dembele, but players from all over the world being bought on 5 yards on Tuesday. No doubt that will be the same on Friday in Friday's transfer window. And there's a ton of new players going up on 5 yards, as always, guys. Just looking down the list now, and I barely even know which ones to pick out. Aaron Hickey, of course, the Scot playing in Bologna. He's certainly worth a little scout, I think. Fikayo Tomori will go up on 5 yards ahead of potentially a loan move to Milan, which could be of interest to some of you. And in Chelsea terms, you've got Jude Soonsup-Bell. Could he be the next wonder kid through the Chelsea Academy, scoring for fun in the youth team, of course? But there's tons of other players as well. You can find out who's going up on 5 yards on our Twitter account at 5_yards. So do get involved there. And please do get in touch with us in the comments section on YouTube by sending us a tweet. We'd love your requests for anything you'd like us to discuss on this show each week. However you'd like the show to pan out, we're always open to ideas. And thank you so much for joining us. Please forgive me for wearing a hat indoors. George, thank you very much. We'll talk again next week.